What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. This is Tony, aka One Leetcode One Day. If you're new here, this channel does one Leetcode per day, following the pattern of topics or series. That is, I'm going to be solving with you together on a Leetcode problem I have never attempted before. You heard that right. There's no prescripted answer. We're on the same page here. But don't you worry, I got you covered, and I promise that I will simulate the average performance code at the end of each video. Here's a little bit about myself. I come from a non-computer science background, so I'm no better than most of, if not all of you guys in terms of coding knowledge. But that is okay. If I can do it, you can do it. It is all about learning on the go. You can think of this video as a first-person gameplay of cracking lead codes. And who doesn't like first-person gameplays, right? So without further ado, let's start today's coding problem. Today we continue on series 1, everything about dynamic programming, and the problem is a continuation of the last two videos, best time to buy and sell stock, now with cooldown. So let's get into it. All right, so we know about what um, on the previous buying selling stock array was like. So you have an array called prices, and the value at in this array is the price of a given stock on the ith day. So we're gonna find the maximum profit you can achieve. You may complete as many transactions as you like, buy one and sell one share of the stock multiple times, with the following restriction: after you sell your stock, you cannot buy stock on the next day. There's a cooldown day. You may not engage in multiple transactions simultaneously. You must sell the stock before you buy again. Okay, so this is like a further restriction in addition to um, the last problem, buy best time to buy and sell stock number two. Right, you can still buy and sell multiple stocks, but you cannot buy again on the same day, right? So, for example, we're given 12302. So you can buy on day one, let's say buy on day zero because we want to use zero indexing consistently. Buy on day zero, sell on day two, you have a gain of $2. Uh, but then, um, um, actually, no, you don't do that. You want to, exploit this free stock. So you buy on day one, sell on day two, do your cooldown on buy on day zero, sell on day one, and do your cooldown on day two, and then buy again for free on day three, and then sell on day four, and you get a full profit of $3. So, with that said, let's start. Let's just first move these descriptions into a new Python Jupyter notebook, um, and we're gonna copy the description and the first example in there because the first example is always the best example. Uh, and here we go. And we're gonna store that for future reference whenever we want to take a look back. It's going to be good and representative. And now we also want the constraints there, right? Because constraints is something we might be able to exploit to make our solution even simpler. All right, so there is your description and your example and your constraints. We're gonna copy also the solution template, and we also want we also want some kind of test case. So we're gonna copy from a previous test case. Let's just rename this Python notebook called lead 309, right? And then what is our test case is 12302. That's our first test case. Right. Let's just build a new line. I want to keep the previous ones there. 12302 and expect 7. Expect 3. Sorry. There you go. And these ones we don't know yet. We're just gonna comment them out. We have our test case and we have our solution template, and let's start sketching it. So we turn to our sketchboard. This was from last video. So now we start with a new one, and we start with this example here. Uh, to prototype upon. And then we're gonna start, thinking about some intuitions here. So we can buy and sell it as many times as we want, but there's a cooldown time. So continuing with our previous intuition that we came up with, which is, always buy any dip and sell at every peak, which is still somewhat valid, but now we need to take also into account that uh, you need to have a cool down time. So really, this kind of like cool down, you need to you need to really, really be careful when do you spend that cool down day on, because that is a day where you definitely cannot do anything. You cannot buy, you cannot sell. Basically, you cannot buy. Like on that cool down day, after selling, you cannot buy anymore. Um, so this pattern is gonna be like you're gonna have to define whether a day is a um, is a day worth doing the cool down or not, right? Um, and how do you right? That's the key question. Um, how to decide if a day is a good day to do the cool down, right? Because other than the cool down, everything else is pretty much the same. So if we can just pre-select the days for the cool down, then we're good, right? If we just pre-select the days for cooldown and then we just because we know if we pre-select cooldown, then that means the the day before the cooldown is the day we sell, right? So we immediately know our selling days, and that would be great. So how do we decide what day is a good is a is a good cooldown date? So let's ask a further question. What is how to quantify the worthness of a cooldown day, right? Quantify it, and then we can pick it. Um, we can take a look, in the optimal solution for, whoops, let me just move these things down a little bit so we can start working on this. So in this problem here, we selected number three, day three, which is, index number two. We selected this day as our cooldown day. And why was that? Because, if we cool down on this day, that means we basically sell on this day, right? Sell on this day. Sell, sell on this day. That was right. Basically, that means we do perform a sell action on the previous day. Why is that good? Well, because well, you don't want to block any low prices, right? This is a low price. This is a low price. You don't want to block any low prices, right? You don't want to block that. This is a dip. You don't want to block any dip, basically. Yeah, let's just, say dip. This is a dip, right? And this is also called like a dip, maybe. So you definitely don't want your cooldown to block your dip, um, 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 if uh, if possible. But then you also don't want your cooldown to block your peak as well. This is actually one of the peaks, right? PEAK. So So if after the peak, right, after the peak after the peak, if the next day is not a a dip day, then it's perfect. We can just cool down, sell at the peak, and then do a cool down, and then wait for the next dip, and then do it. Right, that's just natural. If we have that freedom to cool down, do between a peak and a dip, that is perfect. Um, but nothing's perfect. Sometimes you just have to make a choice because what if a peak and a dip is just next to each other, then you have to make a choice, right? Yeah, so let me just write that down. Okay. If between if there are if there are at least one element between a dip and a following no between a peak and a following dip, then those elements then the element then that element or maybe those elements um, is a good place to cool down without any cost, right? Without any cost, right? So it's going to be like a free cooldown there. But that's the world is not perfect, right? So this is just scenario one, but the world's not perfect. So if there are otherwise, right? Otherwise, if there are no elements between a peak and a following dip, right, this is when we need to decide where to place the cooldown. Right, there's two choices, on the peak or on the dip, right? Yeah. So let's just, maybe start drawing something to make it a little bit more illustrative. So for example, in the best world, right, like in the scenario number one, let me just use a darker color actually, because I think this color is a little bit too bright. Yeah, let's just use this. So in our first case, uh, which is this case here, right? This case here. Um, so if we somehow now have a peak, right? And then there is, between the peak and then the next dip, right? This is like a dip, and then we have another going up. If there's like some non-zero, there's some elements in between, right? For example, there's one element here. If there's one element here, then this element is a great, this is a free cooldown, right? Because this is a peak and this is a dip. You can just do a free cooldown between take advantage of that free cooldown between the peak and the dip. Uh, Second scenario is where the peak and the dip is like back to back, right? We have a peak and next to it we have a dip. You know, so of course maybe we have some value before that, some value after that, right? Um, so now let's just write it as back to back peak and back to back peak dip, right? Back to back peak dip. This is like the scenario. And in this scenario, we have two choices, right? What are our two choices? Well, the first choice, choice one is that we can place our, let me just change the color, okay? Just to make it a little bit more dramatic. Uh, yeah, the first choice, we can place um, our cooldown on the dip, right? So that means CD on the dip. What does that mean? Well, that means if this is our cooldown, then we're definitely like selling here, right? And then on this dip day, we're not buying, so that we have to, continue consider buying on the next day. And who knows what happens next, right? It could be going up, it could be going down. If it goes down again, I mean, there's no buying chance. But that's the risk that we're taking here. Um, right, this is like choice one. We we put CD on the dip. What is the another choice then? The other choice is that we can um it'll be like this. Oops, this is like a different color than before. So we want to use this, right? So it'll be going up, right? Going up, going down, going up again. Going up and then quickly going down, right? And then going up again. So this is your peak. Again, this is your dip. The next choice, let's use back the purple color, is where we actually take CD on the peak. So what does that mean? That means we're gonna target buying from the dip here, because we know it is a dip that we can definitely sit on that gain afterwards. But then we we would uh, we would sell earlier, right? We would sell earlier. Basically, that means we would have to sell earlier. Uh, like like here, yeah, we would have to sell earlier. Buy, and then let's just, yeah, use the purple color again. That means we're gonna have to sell here. We buy here. And in the first case, right? In the first case, this is choice two, right? Choice two. Yeah, choice one is where we maybe buy over there, and then we sell at the peak, right? Peak, we sell. So we're gonna protect the transaction uh, uh, belonging to the peak. Um, in the second case, we're gonna try to protect the transaction, uh, us, starting on the dip. Yeah. Uh, so these are the two choices. So which choice gives you, between these two choices, which one is gonna give you more benefit? Um, um, well, it's kind of hard to decide, right? Like you have to kind of like take into account um, a peak value, and what are you losing by, setting that sell action backward one more step, and what is the value of like giving up a dip and then going for the second best dip value. So this is like kind of like counterintuitive, no, or way or a little bit complicated in terms of intuition. So it's kind of a hard choice to make. So I think we're on a wrong tangent, or like a not optimal tangent of thinking. Um, what else can I think? Well, instead of using this like buy, trying to do a buy dip and sell peak kind of intuition, we could actually use a different perspective, which is more microscopic, and we just look at, each individual step, like what action do we perform on a day-to-day basis, right? So on each day, we can perform basically three types of actions. We can either buy, or we can either sell, or we can just do the cool down. Um, and depending on whether you are buying or not, I mean, you have limited options of like selling or not selling, right? Because if you're not buying, then you cannot sell anything. So, uh, what about that alternative? What about that alternative vision? That microscopic step-by-step vision. Something. Let's just draw something illustrative and then try to figure it out. All right. So, for example, let me just forget about what we just discovered, what we just discussed, and just take a look at a random maybe sketch of a stock price chart, right? And if we just focus on the step-by-step action, uh, can we maybe somehow include this cooldown into our maybe into our consideration here? For example, these are our day-to-day mark there, and basically from this day zero to day one, it's like of course we want to buy and sell, but no, if we do that too frequently, we're going to experience a lot of cool downs, right? So we're probably gonna just buy here, B, and then we're gonna hold here, just do nothing, right? Let's just use a dash to mean do nothing. We'll probably we may want to sell here, but since we have like we have this thing here, we can definitely use this as a CD, right? So we're definitely just holding, and at 3, we're definitely selling because we can just take this free cooldown here, right? This is a free cooldown. And then let's see about these. I'm not sure whether we should, at number 4, whether we should buy. I mean, we definitely should buy, right? Like, just based on this. But, let's say we buy it, okay? See if it's like globally optimal. We buy it and then do we sell here? Because we don't have free cooldowns anymore, so you'll have to be a little bit hesitant. Um, that depends on actually the value between this and this, right? So if you just sell here and you take it back from here, if this is slightly higher than this, right? Right, if this value is slightly higher than this, then definitely you don't want to take it back from here. You kind of like want to hold on to it, right? So if this is actually the case, we don't sell, but we kind of hold here. But then, maybe if this price here is actually lower than this price here, right? If that's the case, then maybe instead of buying here, we actually don't want to buy here. Maybe we buy here instead, right? Maybe we buy here, and we don't buy in the previous dip. Yeah, maybe that's. I mean, this is still all getting overcomplicated. Um, so the best thing to do, I guess, in this locality is to buy here, right? Is to buy here and don't sell until here. Maybe we don't do anything here. We sell here, and maybe for this one we're just gonna do the CD here because there's not a lot of gain in this little local slope. We might as well just hold, and we do a buy here because there's a pretty long price rise streak ahead of us. So we hold. I would definitely want to sell here. Um, and then this is gonna be our cooldown, and we're definitely not buying because it was on a rise. So we're just gonna hold, and this looks like a dip, so we start buying. Then we hold it and we sell it there, and this is gonna be our cooldown, and that's it. That's the end of it. So intuitively I can kind of like feel what strategy to do, but programmatically, do we have a good intuition in terms of, what to do and what not to do? Uh, in this like very microscopic vision, it seems like you cannot be very microscopic because if you're too microscopic, right, uh, then you're definitely gonna hit a local optimum because the cooldown thing is like it takes at least two steps. It's like a combo action. So if you only focus on like step by step action, you're not gonna capture that cooldown. If you're making decisions based on a step to step information, you're not going to allow enough insight or information for cooldowns to optimize. So yeah, I think we still have to kind of like go back to more a larger scope of the problem, and then look at globally how we can simplify it so that we can decide what is a good time to do the cooldowns. Can we build this, I mean, into sub problems? Uh, well, if we cannot decide which days to cool down, then we cannot break them down into sub problems. But if we know which days to cool down, then we can basically break the problem into compartments, into sections, into smaller arrays. Uh, because cooldown is almost like on that day the stock market doesn't go to work, and everybody just stay at home uh, and watch TV and whatnot. So, but the hard thing is to decide what are like the days where you definitely can perform your cooldown. I mean, if it's case one, right, that's like a free money in the bank because because if we have like a peak value there and we have like some price drop and then we have another price drop. So yeah, basically if we have any like downslope of lasting, at least 3 days, then we can use you know, the the value at the middle of the downslope as the cooldown as the cooldown day because we're gaining by holding stock during stock rising. Like if we don't do anything during stock dropping, that's fine. I mean, we only get money by riding the upward wave, right? The downward slide, well, you can do all the cooldown you want during the downward slides. The hard problem, is when you do not have those nice downward slopes that are, that contains at least three elements. So that is when, you no longer have those free cooldowns, and you have to make a decision. So these are hard decisions to make, and we basically need a somewhat localized way to judge whether it is a good time or a good idea to perform a cool down during such brief drops, right? Those those back-to-back peak dip, so or uh, you know, AKA, let's do an AKA brief drop, brief price drop. Yeah, these brief price drops are gonna be killing us because that is where any cool down action needs further justification, right? So at those back-to-back peak to dip brief price drops, it's a brief drop. That is where we need to really worry about. So during this entire, up and down of a stock market, uh, the only thing we need to worry about, the only places we need to, the only kind of like shape or terrain or geometry that we really need to focus on are those back-to-back peak dip price drops. So let's first identify those points, right? Those are like the only places where we need to make a decision. Anywhere else, the decision is self-explanatory and it's just straightforward. I would just follow, the buy peak, buy dip and sell peak kind of like heuristic, or we just use, the crawling step by step, very short-sighted decision um, heuristic. We can get it done, but it's only when we have, these back-to-back uh, peak dip, peak to dip drops where we have to make a decision, right? So what are the possible decisions here? Um, so we either sell at this peak and then skip the dip, or we don't sell at the peak. So yeah, so I think this is how you can categorize or separate them into cases. Sell at the uh, uh, at the peak, right? So uh this is a scenario where you actually sell at the peak, right? The second one is where you basically hold at the peak, right? So these are the two options. We're just gonna try to decide which action to take better at any of these like back-to-back peak dip price drops. Yeah. So so that's like our new kind of like new revelation here. Uh, right. So let's just write it down. Okay. The only places that require extra attention are the back-to-back uh, peak dip drop, short drops, short price drops. Yeah, one day. Yeah, like one day price drops. Right. Two two actions, two possible actions. One one is to sell at the peak. Right. Two is to hold at the peak. So what do you mean if we hold at the peak? Uh, uh, um, what if we hold at the peak? Shall we hold at the peak? I mean, uh, yeah, like if you hold, I mean, hold. Is it hold or empty? I mean, right? Hold or empty. Those are two different things. Uh, well, because you were on a previous. If this is a peak, that means the previous value is less than this current peak, right? So you could have sold it beforehand, meaning selling here. That way you can at least start buying at the new dip, right? That's something, you either, take advantage of the peak or you take advantage of the dip, right? That's kind of like a heuristic. So instead of we say hold at the peak, we want to or empty at the peak, right? Because we only want those two things. We don't want hold at the peak, right? Right. Let's just say that. Like say we never want to hold at any peak. uh, because I think it's just simply it's simply not optimal to hold at any peak. You either sell it before the peak or you sell it at the peak. But I mean, I don't know how I can rule it out. So let's just say hold at a peak. Is that still an option? Hold at the peak, empty at the peak. Oh wait, didn't we just say CD on the peak? Yeah. If we CD on the dip, that means we sell at the peak, and then we move on, right? And if we CD on the peak, so that we can buy at the next dip, then that means we must sell at the previous value. What if I mean, who said you have to put a CD here, right? I think I think what I if you want to break something into two cases, you want to make sure that those two cases are mutually exclusive, and when combined, they form the whole set of probability one. So maybe instead of say CD on the dip, maybe we should say no CD on the dip, right? Yeah, this is like how you separate cases, no CD on the dip. Uh, but it doesn't mean that you're gonna buy the dip, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna buy that dip. So this is a considerably more difficult case, it sounds to me. Now we're gonna have to consider, quite a lot of different cases. So choice one is what? CD on the dip, right? And choice two is no CD on the dip. So now if there's no CD on the dip, what we can do is we can no CD on the dip. Uh, so we can. Does that mean we're gonna buy at the dip? Yeah, if there's no CD on the dip, we would definitely buy on the dip, right? This does directly, lead to, buy on the dip, buy dip. Because if there's no CD on the dip, why not buy it? I mean, right? If you know it's a dip, it's for everything afterwards. The only right choice here to do, and the best choice here to do, is to buy the dip, right? So this like directly leads to buy the dip. But CD on the dip, what does that mean? It directly means we sell sell on the top on the peak, right? On the previous peak. So these are like uh direct inferences here, because the only time a CD can happen is when on the previous day you had a dip. You had a sell action. So right, so these two choices are now mutually exclusive, and combined they form the whole probability of one. So, but what does this mean? No CD on the dip. It means buy dip, right? If it means buy dip, does it mean anything about the peak? Buying dip, it doesn't indicate anything on the peak, right? Like we can, if there's no CD on the dip, if there's no CD on the dip, uh, we are free to buy the dip, which we will do. Um, then what does it say for the peak before? Do we sell that peak? Well, because if we sell on that peak, we definitely cannot buy on the dip anymore because the buy is gonna be a CD. Yeah. So what this also indicates, right? What this also let me just remove this line here because now it's kind of like getting into our way. So no city on the dip. This also means what? Um, no city on the dip. This also means um, 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 there's no cell, right? There's no cell previously. That's the one thing we can indicate. We can inference. There's no cell at at the peak. So there's no cell. So we don't know if previously we sold it or not, but this just means that there's no cell. So we don't know if we sell before that. We just don't know. We just don't know about it. Okay. We just don't know. It just means that we don't know. We don't sell here. So these two cases are kind of like mutually exclusive now, and they combine to make up the full probability of one. What else can we infer from here? So in the first case, we do CD on the dip. That means, does it mean we buy anything later? It doesn't mean that, right? It doesn't mean that. Actually, it doesn't directly indicate that. So we need to be careful about what comes next, about what, you know, could be said about these things. Yeah, this is a little bit annoying. I just want to remove that and put this back. All right. So it doesn't mean that we're gonna buy next. Um, right. So these are the two cases. It does mean that we're gonna sell at the peak, and we're definitely not buying at the dip because we're doing the CD on the dip. But it doesn't mean anything about the it doesn't indicate anything about the action next to the dip. It'll have its own logic, okay? It just means that um, it just means that at this dip here we're empty, right? So yeah, so that's something we know. We are empty here. We are empty. Whoops. What did I just do? We are we're empty here. Let me just write empty here. We're empty here. And you can either buy or you can just either, sit back and pass uh, at the step at the day on the day next to the dip. So we're not against that. Does it mean like now you can treat this thing as a complete new problem? Because here we're not buying anything. We're just letting the day pass through. This is like a new sub problem. Does it look like it? Everything afterward is like a new sub problem, right? Uh, what about? It's almost like okay, we completely forget about our past. Whatever gain we did in our past, we just sit on it, and then we're gonna start a complete new sub problem. And here, if we buy here, no CD on the dip, no sell at the peak. That means we're definitely buying the buying the dip. All right, and if we're not selling here, if we're not selling at the peak, so we're holding on to it, right? Well, it doesn't mean holding on. It just means we're not selling. But um, we could sell here, or maybe we could sell somewhere else. So it means that we basically cut, you know, this into like a sub problem, right? We just basically cut everything before this as a sub problem that we can, solve separately, right? Because it's this peak that had no selling, so we can just ignore it, cut that day and its value off at all because we're not doing anything in whatever the price is or peak or whatever it is, right? So we can cut those into subproblems and just solve the previous subproblem. And what about the buy here? So this is like buy. This is a different subproblem. It's almost like we definitely decide to buy. And I mean, the initial classical, buy and sell stock problem two, it doesn't have such things at the beginning. Like you don't really buy at the beginning. You don't know. So how can we force, this to look like the original classical problem? Um, because because we know that we will definitely buy at the first dip in any in the classical stock problem too. So maybe we can split this right at here, right? We can split this into a subproblem because if we take this as the first element and then because this is the immediate drop and we know this is a dip, then we're definitely going to take the buy action, right? So we just add these two together. So this is going to be like our subproblem 2 and this is subproblem 1. We just add them up, right? Great. So see if we can do that. So for choice number 1, we're actually here. We're just so we know that this is empty, right? It's a dip, but uh, 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 we're doing CD on the dip, so we're just sitting through the day, the dip day. We're not doing anything, so that's why we can separate whatever comes afterwards as a new subproblem. But what about what happened before? Well, we knew that we did sell at the peak, and if it was a peak at all, then by treating whatever happened before as a subproblem will cause the algorithm to actually sell at the end. So we can treat this as a subproblem as well, subproblem 1 and subproblem 2. Okay, guys, you know what? We just cracked it, I think. The only thing we need to do now, right, is to find these back-to-back peak dip places, and then we're gonna just cut the problem there. And we cut at any of these back-to-back peak dip drop, and then we're just cutting those, cutting the entire array into subarrays. And that's great. So the only last question we're gonna ask ourselves is like, how do we find such subproblems, right? Um, so we can pretend that we're like solving the classical problem, until we see a until we see a until we see a short drop like this. When we see a short drop like this, we're gonna basically when we see a short drop like this, we're basically gonna um, say, okay, this is a short drop, and short drop meaning that we have a dip right after a peak, right? Whenever we see such a short drop, we're gonna say, hey, this is a short drop, and we're gonna just cash on what we did, what we gained so far, and we stop it there, right? We stop it there, and we're gonna start again. Like this is where we start a new problem. This is where we do the separation and we split. This is like um yeah, doing it one way, or we can do it in the other way, which is we split the subproblem here in these two ways, and we sum them up. But then, of course, we need to combine the maximum between these two cases. So we need to split. Okay, this is getting a little bit more again uh, mm, uncertain because we need to basically perform the split in two different ways. And then we're still going to calculate the sub. Wait. Did we exclude this point there? Now, like you see in this sub problem here, uh, 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 can we just assign or just assign this dip to either subproblem 1 or subproblem 2. Um, yeah, I think we can include it into subproblem 1 because if the last point is like a drop, or we don't really do anything about it, right? So we're okay to, I guess we're okay to include the um, include the last point there. We should be okay. Right, so let's just say the subproblem 1 is gonna include the dip. Right, the subproblem 1 is gonna include the dip, or so we're basically taking the peak and dip either in the first subproblem or take the peak and dip in the second subproblem. Yeah, split them like that, and then find the best way to split them. Basically, yeah, find the best way to split them. Um, find the best way to split them, huh? Mm, um, so what do we do about it? What do we do about it? Um, we're checking if this has, yeah, if it's worthwhile to include the peak and the dip in the left subproblem 1. Right, if it's worthwhile to do that. So when we sweep from, when we crawl or like do a for loop from left to right, whenever we encounter such a subproblem, oh no, such a um, back-to-back peak dip drop, we have two choices, right? Choice one is uh, we're gonna include both the peak and the dip, and then cut the problem there, or we can just cut the problem right before the peak and the dip. Are they gonna give us the same value? Definitely not, because those are two different choices. Uh, um, so these are like two different cuts, right? Two different cuts of the array. Um, so we either cut it one way or we cut it in the other way. It's about cutting cakes, right? Now you're about, we have on a higher level, we have at each of these cutting points, two choices of cutting the cake. So, so if we have, m numbers of such decision points, we have in theory um, 2 to the power of m numbers of ways of doing it, and ways could each of these combinations could yeah, they could lead to a solution. They could lead to a solution. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna say this time I'm going to give up because I think this is a little bit harder than I imagined, and this heuristic that I come up with, it does not lead to a quick solution because the way I try to split these things, they lead to a high time complexity in terms of calculation. So I'm just gonna say our algorithm, if executed, is going to be it could be as much as 2 to the power of n. It could be. Uh, right. And then in terms of time complexity, space complexity, uh, we may be ON as well because, yeah, because I don't see it being O1. Anyway, this is like our best attempt here, and it didn't really work. So let's go back to Leetcode and take a look at some, solution or other people's code. Wow, this is a complete solution. Let's take a look at number three. Whoa, where are we? Okay, we're at the same place. What is this? Description. Oh, it's a different question. It's a different question. Time to buy, sell, stack. With cooldown, right? Let's go to the cooldown, the one with the cooldown. Right. So there's a series of problems. Right. Found lead code. hmm Dynamic programming. hmm Into subproblems, right? Recursion. Yep. Enjoy the ride. Okay. Dynamic programming, state machine, intuition. Let's first take a look at the complexity. O of n, O of 1. That's good enough. Yet another dynamic programming. All right, so let's take a look at the first dynamic programming problem solution. Right, approach one, dynamic programming with state machine intuition. First of all, let's take a different perspective to look at the problem, unlike other algorithm print problems. Here we treat the problem as a game and the trader as an agent in the game. The agent can take actions that lead to gain or lose of the game points, and the goal of the game for the agent is to gain the maximum points. Makes sense, right? In addition, we will introduce a tool called state machine, which is a mathematical model of computation. Later on, we will see how the state machine coupled with the dynamic programming technique can help us solve the problem easily. All right, in the following sections, we will first define a state machine that is used to model the behavior and states of the game agent. Then we will demonstrate how to apply the state machine to solve the problem. All right, definition. State machine has a state. It could have held, sold, reset. So held is when you already are buying something and you're holding on, or you're sold, or you are in the state. The agent has just sold a stock right before entering the state, and the agent holds no stock at hand. Okay, it's like on the day of selling, right? Reset is where there's the cool down. So the agent holds no stock and not sell a stock, did not sell a stock before. More importantly, it is also the transient state before the held and sold. So it's the cool down state. After the sold state, the agent can no longer immediately acquire any stock, but if forced into reset state. Right, right. So reset is like the initial state or something like that. At any moment, the agent can only be in one state. The agent would transition into another state by performing some actions, namely action sell. The agent sells a stock at current moment, or action buy, right? Yeah, you can sell, you can buy. Um, yeah, or you can rest or take no action at all. Right. So okay, this is a state machine. Um, nice. So first, you start from uh, um, reset, right? Like start from initially reset, and then if you buy, you get into held, and if you sell, you get into hold. Mm, but your next action is gonna definitely lead you to a reset. Uh, right. And then if you're in held, if you rest, you can still be in held. Yeah. So this is like kind of like, yeah, a nice state machine representation. Notice that in all states except for the soul state, by doing nothing, we would remain the same state, which is why there's a self loop transition. Yeah, right. So deduction. Now, One might wonder how exactly the state machine that we defined can help to solve the problem. As we mentioned before, we modeled the problem as a game, and the trader is an agent in the game, and this is where our state machine comes into the picture. The behavior and states in the game agent can be modeled by our state machine, right? Stock price and things like that. Given a list, given a list stock price, our agent would walk through each price point one by one. At each point, the agent would be in one of three states: held, sold, and reset. That we defined before. And each point, the agent would take one of the three actions, which will lead to the next state as the next price point. Now, if we chain up each state at each price point, it would form a graph where each path that starts from the initial price point and ends at the last price point represents a combination of transactions that the agent could perform throughout the game. Okay, now we're talking about graphs from state machines. Interesting. Let's take a look. We have a price. Okay, that's the price chart. Um, day one, day zero, day one, day two, day three, day four, and these are the states. So what do they mean, minus infinity? Um, the above graph show all possible paths that our game agent walk through the list. Okay, all possible transitions, which correspond to all possible combination of transitions that a trader can perform with a given price sequence. So say if we had like the first one here, um, if we are at sold, which is quite unlikely because we cannot, oh, we can, right? Like if we just buy and sell it on the same day, right? If we buy and sell it on the same day, we will go into, the cooldown or reset state. And then we can either go to we can either take a buy action and go into held, or we can just stay idle and go stay in reset. Right, something like that. And on the other hand, if we just hold, right? If we just hold on onto the first onto the we just hold onto the first, uh, on the first day, right? If we yeah, there's a because at the beginning I think we're in reset. We cannot be in sold. We cannot be in held because we don't hold anything. So these are two like invalid states. The only valid state at step zero or even before day zero is we were in reset, right? And then we could choose to keep doing nothing and we still stay in this reset state, or we can go to held by purchase this stock at today's price, which is $1, and we get into that state, held state. Yeah. And then once we're in held, we can either go to sold or we can stay in held. Right. Okay, now I'm starting to understand this sequence. And what does those values mean? The goal is to find such a path in the above graph that maximizes the profits. Okay, these mean the profits, right? So if we start at the state of zero, and if we pay the price of one to hold this stock, we're at profit minus one. If we then sell it, then we jump into plus one because now we have get a gain and we just cash that stock. Now we're at gain of one. If we continue to and because we're selling it on day number one here, uh, on day number two here we have to cool down so that the profit stays. And then on the day three, we can either just hold on to it. Uh, what does hold on to it mean? Like If we hold on to it, if we hold on to it, mm, if we hold on to it, um, because we just sold it, right? Like we sold it at at day one. So now on day number two, we have to do the cool down. So then, so then, right? And then we can only start buying on day three. So if we do buy it, because it's free, right? We're still at zero at a profit of one, but then on the next day if we sell it, we're gonna add profit three. So here on this day, if we just don't do anything after we sold it, how can we go to the value of two? I mean, that's quite weird, isn't it? It's pretty weird. Because if we don't buy anything, how come that this goes from one to two? Yeah, I'm a little bit confused. In each nodal graph, we also indicate the maximum profits that the agent has gained so far in each state of each step, and we highlight the path that generates the maximum profits. Don't worry about them for the moment. We'll explain in detail how to calculate them in the next section. Okay. Algorithm. In order to implement the above state machine, we could define three arrays, hold, sold, and reset, which correspond to the three states that defined before. Each element in the array represents the maximum profits that we could gain at a specific price point with the specific state. Okay, so you're talking about something like maximum reward to go, right? In terms of dynamic programming at each state. For instance, the element sold to represents the maximum profits we gain if we sell the stock at the price point price two, right? According to according to the state, and that's like on day number two, right? According to the state machine we defined before, we can then deduce the formulas to calculate the values for these state arrays as follows. Sold I equal to hold I minus 1 plus price I. Held I equals to max held I minus 1. Reset I minus 1 plus minus price I. Reset equal to max of this and this. Here's how we interpret each formula. So this is like a recursive formula for all three possible states. Um, you could have used like one array, just use different, maybe 1, 2, 3 to represent each whether in each state or not. Um, but I guess you could do this too, right? Um, in the previous state, salt can only be held. Therefore, the maximal profit of this state is the maximal profit of the previous state plus the revenue by selling the stock at the current price. Held I. In the previous state of held, we also held and does transaction or the previous reset. Requires a stock. Reset. Find the maximal profit. And what are we doing here? Uh, as one could notice above, in order to calculate the value for each array, we reused intermediate values. This is where better dynamic programming comes into play. More specifically, we only need the intermediate values at one step before the current step. As a result, rather than keeping all the values in the three arrays, we could use a sliding window of size 1 to calculate the value of max, sold, and reset. In the following animation, we demonstrate the process how the three arrays are calculated by each step. Right, this is like very typical dynamic programming, but somehow I'm not seeing it somehow. As a byproduct, not only would we obtain the maximal profits at the end, but we also could recover each action that we should perform on the past. Yeah, that's the optimal control law that we know what dynamic programming provides, although this is not required by the problem. In the above graph, by starting from the final state and walking backwards following the path, we could obtain a sequence of action that leads to the maximum profit at the end. This is pretty cool. Uh, okay, complexity analysis, time, uh, there. And yet you have another dynamic programming approach. By the way, just for a quick summary, I think this dynamic programming is really a pretty principled way of formulating it. It's just that I don't have, I guess the patience today to fully understand this thing here. So I'm gonna just skip it for now and take a look into the next one here. In another dynamic programming, intuition, definition, target function, price, cooldown, price minus price plus MP. What is MP? Maximal profit that we can gain for the price subsequence from the index I. Right, this is actually a pretty awesome way of formulating the subproblem as well. Yeah, these two subsequences. This might be, similar to what we are doing, but it's still, a little bit complicated. But then, of course, you're going to have a time complexity of ON2, which sucks, and a space complexity of ON. So definitely, this is not something to learn, but maybe we can take a look. This is a hard question for me. This should be marked as hard. I don't think I would want to work for a compound. This company in an interview. Insane difficult for interview questions. State machine plus DP equals nuclear bomb. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely not easy. Okay, it's definitely not easy. So I think what we're gonna do when we come at this again is that we're gonna really study this dynamic programming formulation plus state machine. Like state machine is basically a transformation of perspective of this problem. I mean, we kind of like was trying to transform our problem into a different perspective as well by trying to break the chain, split the problem at those back-to-back peak dip drops. Um, but we didn't make it through, right? Like, I mean, this looks promising, but then the the number of things that we still have to consider after the split, it seems like it's like an O 2 to the power of n problem, rather than making it simpler. So it's not a crisp split, so to speak. So we gave that up and we were looking at the solution, and the solution is telling us, okay, you're probably gonna have to do a state machine transformation of the problem perspective in addition to using dynamic programming. This was kind of actually quite mind blowing to me. I mean, this is definitely some principled way of doing it, but from the first round, I also realized that there's something I don't quite understand yet. So yeah, I'm gonna probably take it offline now, and then I'll digest this, and then in the next video, trying to you know, show you guys what my digested understanding of this solution is, and just make a video on it. All right, so today we actually didn't submit any code, but um, well, I will come back. I will come back um, just a few hours later. You can still consider this as part one of today's challenge. I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna finish this up. I'm gonna basically digest this dynamic programming solution, and then I'm gonna come back and solve it. All right, so this is part one, guys. I'll see you in part two.